Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and I think we should go to Santiago, Chile today. Shall we? I haven't ever been there, and in fact, my awareness of South America as a whole is absolutely lamentable. I just realized that I only know one human being in South America, which is not the case for other continents. Anyway, somebody recently said, well, you ought to do a show about Chile's recent election. And I thought, well, I guess I'll call the only person I know in South America, a lovely person named Carol. But she's not very politically oriented, so I don't think she's going to want to talk to me. But I called her, and she immediately put me in touch with her friend, Hugo Benedevi. And certainly that's a very promising situation. So I'm going to have a conversation with Hugo today. Good. Hugo Benedevi is also a professor, as I used to be. And his field is very different from mine, though. He is a professor of finance. He's teaching in a school of business connected to what I have to pronounce as the University of the Andes in Santiago. He pronounced it correctly, but I won't even attempt that. Anyway, good morning, Hugo. Thank you for this.
Good morning, Meta. Thank you for the invitation.
It's going to be interesting and educational for me. I need to pull up my socks and get smart and figure out how to understand not only the politics of South America, and especially at the moment of Chile, but I should know more about economics. And as I understand it, you could inform me about an issue that is even more mysterious to me than the basic question of how an economy runs. It's the kind of system that Bitcoin runs on. What is this thing?
Cryptocurrencies, blockchain and cryptocurrencies.
Blockchain, yeah.
Yes.
Somebody spent half an hour trying to teach me what blockchain was once, and it didn't stick, but I was impressed. I began to think maybe there's something of value here. I don't know. Anyway,
so I'll make you an offer. You can have me another time, and I'll gladly talk about cryptocurrencies in general and blockchain technology and how that technology can help nations move forward in their economic systems. So we can put that aside for later.
That is a wonderful idea. All right, that's a deal. That's a promise. I'll absolutely come after you again. Thank you for the offer. Once a month, we hold a meeting that's open to activists everywhere in the world. So people from all kinds of places get together and talk about whatever's on their minds. And one of the things I kept bringing up and talked about with enthusiasm was the wonderful results of the election in Chile. And I thought, really? Okay, I'm sorry I hadn't followed that so much. And then, so I thought, well, maybe I should find out who this wonderful guy is that got elected. And because my friends were so enthusiastic. So I called Carol, and she said, well, I asked her what she thought about it, and she was much more skeptical. She said, in South America, when somebody says he's a leftist, watch out, because they may be up for something like Maduro or one of these other more extreme types of economists. So I didn't know what she was going to put me on to, whether you were pro or anti, but tell me about what has gone on in terms of the recent election and and whether one should be apprehensive or enthusiastic.
So I'll answer that in a moment. but to give you some perspective, and I think this is why the elections, Chilean elections, were in the news all over the world, is because it follow a trend that we have been seeing all over the world, which is the arising of the extremes, right? So while in the 90s and the early 2000s, we were more, or at least the world moved between center left and center right, as time has moved on, we have become more polarized, and the extremes have been gaining power. We saw that in the US elections. We've seen this in European elections. And now we saw it in Chilean elections, where the runner-ups for the second round of voting were both from the extreme left and from the extreme right. And I think that made the news because it's the first time in Chilean history that we have such extreme opposites going for elections, especially because none of them were the most favored candidates on previous rounds, or at least in the polls. So that's one of the interesting things, and I think that obviously changes perspectives in terms of investors looking at the country, which are the ones that mostly move the news, is because the policies going forward would be extremely different from one candidate to the other. So that's why. None of them were my candidates. I was more on the right, but not extreme right. I was more of a center right. And I think while that is the case, that I felt that there were a lot of people like me. We have a very democratic elections. I think Chileans are proud of their political election system. We have analogous paper votes, which are counted on the same day of the elections. On each election site, there are representatives of all the parties involved. So these are public counting of the votes. So we feel it's very transparent. The results are available almost immediately. So in the same day, we have 99.9% of the votes counted, and there is usually not a recount. Because we trust the process, because it's public, it's available, it's transparent, and we have voluntary votes, voluntary voting, and this turned out to be the election with the highest turnout in decades. So while I don't share the results, I do believe that the process was completely fair, completely transparent, and the overwhelming majority chose President-elect. So we have a new president. We'll have a new president in March, Gabriel Boric.
Now tell me about his. I don't even know his name. Tell me about him.
Yeah. So he is currently. We have a dual chamber. So in the Congress and the Senate. So we have deputies and senators. He's currently a deputy. He's been involved in politics for probably 20 years, or well, we could say 20 years. He's the youngest president-elect so far. He's only 36, I believe. But he's been involved in politics most of his life. He was in politics when he was a student. He led what we called the student uprising almost, I would say, 15 years ago. With student protest demanding for free education and big changes in the educational system. So he's from a generation of politicians, I would say, that right during their university studies, they got involved in politics and making changes. He's very well known from telling people that he wants to make changes from the street to the Congress, and not the other way around. So he wants to empower people through, I would say, actions. And unfortunately, these actions have mostly been protests and riots and that sort of thing. But he also played a very important role in something that happened 2 years ago. I don't know if you watched the news, but on October 2019, there were huge riots in Chile. We had military go on the street. We had curfews for about a month. And all of this process was triggered by something that has happened. I mean, it happens in the world. I mean, it happens everywhere. So there was a fair increase in the subway. Our subway prices were about 80 cents, and the subway prices increased by 4%. So we're talking about less than 4 cents of increase. and that led to riots where give or take 30% of all subway stations were burnt to the ground.
Oh my God.
We had looting all over city. We had lockdowns. The military had to go on the street. We had curfews, and more than the hike increase in price, the saying was, it's not 30 pesos, it's 30 years. So what this event triggered is this feeling of oppression and inequality, that conflux that came together in this like pressure cook that it just exploded with this fare increase, and this triggered demands from all over both the economic sectors, the political sectors, anything that you can think of. Anyone that was not happy about something came out to protest.
When they were
and this was
30
a million
years,
people on the streets.
30 years of something, but was there any agreement about what these 30 years had been? What is it they all had in common that they objected to?
So my view is, in almost every economic measure and socio-economic measure, Chile improved in the past 30 years. And why 30 years? Because that's when the Pinochet dictatorship officially ended, and we had a beginning of a democratic period 30 years ago, or now it's 32. And what happened is that in every measure, Chile improved. So if you say education, access to education, quality of education, health, access to health, years of life, expected years of life, income, literacy, any social measure that you can think of, Chile improved, except income inequality. So we became a less equal society. The rich became richer at a faster rate that the poor became less poor. And that translates into many things, right? So even though there was better access to education was different, right? There was better access to preschool, but preschools were different. There was better access to healthcare, but healthcare was different. And that feeling of inequality leads to a feeling of injustice. And maybe I'm speaking out of my area. I'm an economist and a finance guy, not a sociologist. So maybe what I'm saying is it's pretty obvious to you. But that feeling of injustice, and even with justice, there was saying that there is justice for rich and there's justice for poor. There are justice for the victims and there's a different justice for the delinquents. So that feeling of injustice in general led to riots, and that is and some of the protesters were protesting, well, for free education. For some groups were protesting for free preschool educations, and another group might be protesting for no more mandatory preschool. So even protesters were not agreeing among them, but they were protesting. They were protesting for, obviously, gas prices, increases in taxes. Other groups for protesting for decreases in taxes. We have groups protesting for the prices of private tolls. We have a private toll system. Prices of water. Anything that you can think of that people were unhappy for, well, they could go and protest. And protests kept getting bigger and bigger and more violent. We had more looting on stores. Supermarkets were empty. Supermarkets burned to the ground in some places. So it was pretty catastrophic. And a way that politicians sort of figured out how to appease people, at least for now, was to say, okay, everything comes down to the Constitution. So all the problems in the world, in the country, come from the Constitution. So we're going to change it. So we'll have a convention that's going to rewrite completely the Constitution. And there were groups that were very against it, obviously. But after some negotiations, we had the far left against and the far right against. and Gabriel Boric,
both
president-elect.
Sorry, but both of them are against the proposed new constitution. Is that it?
Or they were against the process of rewriting the constitution because it's not rewritten yet. I'll talk about the constitutional convention moving forward, but at that point we have the I would say extreme right and conservative right against changing it, and we have the extreme left against the process which was proposed to change the constitution. So they were saying, let's write this from the bottom up. We want the people to write it. We don't want to be written by representatives. And Gabriel Boric was one of the deputies that agreed with this process.
Spell his name.
So, yes, Gabriel Boric, or Boric.
B-O-R-I-C.
B-O-R-E-C.
E-C.
I see.
And it's Gabriel, like G-A-B-R-I-E-L.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And now
so
he was one of the people doing what again?
So he was the only representative from the extreme or far left, if you want to call it like that supported this process. So he unlocked or had gather enough voting power to move forward with this proposal of rewriting the constitution. So he's credited, at least from the point of view of the voters and the street, that he is the one that made this possible. So that gave him a lot of voting power. And I think that's what triggered him. This is 2 years ago, so he probably wasn't even thinking about running for president. He was 33 at the time. But he gained a lot of a public audience and followers through this because he did empower this movement. So from that, we had public elections to choose representatives that are going to propose a new constitution. And that process is ongoing, and what it sort of builds on this change and on this recent election, again, because we had these very extreme positions or worldviews on both candidates. It's very likely that the result of this new constitution would be different according to which president was elected. Mm-hmm. Why? Because if we look at the parties where the representatives that are writing the constitution come from, well, most of them come from the left. So we had mostly left-leaning constitution writers that are proposing the constitution, and we'll have a far-left president. So one of the worries was that if the opposite candidate cast, which is the far right, was the winner on this election round, well, then the constitution would probably be much different, the proposed constitution. So we were even discussing whether it should be a presidential system or not. And if it's not a presidential system, well, the new president or the opposite president would only be ruling for 2 years, and then we'll have a prime minister or something like that. Now the concern is, now that we have a far left president, well, maybe he's going to have more presidential powers coming from this new constitution. We don't allow for continuous new mandate by the constitution. Well, that might be moved out, and now we have continuous re-elections, like we have seen other constitutions in other countries where the elected presidents are from the far left. So we saw that in Argentina, we saw it in Venezuela, where after the far left president comes to power, and if they control the Senate, or they control whoever's rewriting the constitution, like it happened in Venezuela, well, my concern, at least personally, is how both institutions are going to play together to impose the changes that their view wants to impose. And this could lead for a continuous re-election like we've seen in other places. So that's I'm sorry, big picture.
No, that's just, I mean, you're giving me a great overview. Now, but in terms of how long the terms, you say that they won't be able to be reelected, but how long will they serve?
It's 4 years. So
4 years.
It's 4 years. Okay. And what we've seen in the past is that previous presidents have gone off for a period and then have been reelected. So our current president, which is under with very low support from any party, he used to be president 8 terms. I mean, not the consecutive, but the previous term. Michelle Bachelet, which was from the left, also served two non-consecutive terms. Because we haven't had many public figures that come up to this, I think, to the level of I don't know, I wouldn't say respect, but the level of support that a president requires. So on the previous elections, the candidate from the left was a journalist with absolutely no political experience, because we don't have enough representatives, or I feel like we haven't had enough representatives to become president.
Okay, now you call him a far left candidate, and I just am not sure what all that means. I have my own history of dealing with communism, visiting communist states, so I'm pretty strongly anti-communist, but you wouldn't say, but apart from that, I don't know. Tell me what these guys stand for that worry you.
So he is pretty close to communist. In the the primaries? In the primaries on the left, the first runner-up on the polls was the communist representative, and by surprise, Gabriel Boric won. Probably what people think is that it's because people from the center and from the right were worried that the runner-up would be the communist candidate, so they voted for Gabriel Boric as to ensure that the communist wouldn't go into the onto the last round of voting. But his ideas are pretty far on the left. We have a private pension system. He's proposing that we move into a distribution system, increasing taxes, public health insurance. So most of the, I would say, capitalist view that we've had for the past 30 years would be at least socialized. Now, another thing of concern is that his party, or the party that he represents, does not have enough people, because it was not a very well-known party, to create a government. So he's going to have to form alliances with other parties, and one of the parties that does have a lot of power, or has more power, at least in terms of turnout, is the Communist Party. So they will probably have a big influence. Now, again, it's not just about what the president can do, it's also about what the new constitution would say. One of the things that have been discussed in the constitution is nationalizing mineral rights. So our biggest export is copper, where we have a national company, governmental company, which is Codelco, one of the largest copper producers in the world. But we also have mines from the other largest copper mines in the world. We have a lot of lithium, which is going to be probably the most important non-metal in the future because of batteries. and there's a big concern that those mineral rights are going to be nationalized again, as they were when we had our first socialist president, Allende,
Okay.
which led to the military coup of Pinochet.
Right. Well, my memory of those days is fresher than my memory of recent years, because I just haven't been following anything there. Okay, now when you say the people agreed that the problem was the Constitution, that in itself right there is confusing to me. What is there? What is?
I think that it's confusing to most people that know that these things are not ruled by the Constitution. But that is something that appeased the public and ended the riots. So I'm grateful that it ended the riots, but it's definitely not the solution to Muslim problems.
Yeah, that's what I would have assumed, that the Constitution would not determine things like whether or not the country nationalizes the lithium mines. That isn't a part written into the Constitution. That would be the result of the politics, right? So what will be the change? Well, what was the fight over in terms of what do different groups want to do to the Constitution to change it to fit their ideas?
Perfect. So in one sense, it's what is the guarantees that the state or the government has to uphold given the Constitution. So one of the biggest claims is that the government should ensure public health, ability, and quality for everyone. And if that is in the Constitution, then if the government is not providing that, then you can sue the government. Most likely say, you're not doing your job, because in the Constitution it says that you should guarantee that every Chilean has equal, fair access to quality education, insurance, health insurance, and housing, for instance. And the feeling is that if you put those things in the Constitution, then they will become true, which is not the case, right? Because the Constitution is not a magic wand. The saying, okay, we just write it down here, and health is going to be of equal access and quality for everyone. It's going to be a process. People don't know it's going to be a process, and at the end, it comes down to money. How are we going to fund all this? And one way to make money is to nationalize things, right? So if the property of all the mineral rights by Constitution belongs to the government or to the state or to the country, then the government has no say in it, right? It's not the government that is expropriating or nationalizing copper. It's the Constitution that says that copper belongs to the country and not to third parties. There's also a big discussion on water rights. So we are one of the few countries in the world that has private water rights. So you companies and persons can purchase water rights to ensure access to water, and that has led to some parts of the country to not have enough water for population, because mining companies, farms have purchased these water rights, and so they have preferential access to water. So that's another thing that's most likely going to change in the Constitution. We're likely not going to have water rights in the future, and that's going to generate some big impacts on companies, right? Because they are they develop their plans and their processes based on the fact that they would have enough water, because it was guaranteed, because they purchased water rights, and now maybe they don't have them. So it's going to be a change, and that affects investments, right, in the future. We might not have as many companies as we had before, and that leads into jobs, employment, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but you can see why people, of all the things that you want to guarantee people, is that everybody should have access to water. People.
And their discussion is, well, is it that we don't have enough water, or is it that we're not being efficient with water? And I know this is a huge discussion, and again, not my field of specialty, but if water is completely free, then someone is probably not using it correctly, because there is no incentive to use it correctly because it's free. So when we have these water rights, at least you ensure that people are offering a price that will force them, in a way, to be efficient with waters, right? So irrigation systems, for instance. So a farm that has to purchase a water right is very likely going to be very efficient in their irrigation systems. Well, farms that get it for free are probably not, because they get it for free. Now, obviously, that is a very extreme example, and there are villages that the government has to provide water by water tanks, because there used to be free flow of water from rivers, or you could just dig a well and you would find water. That well's now dry, so the government provides water. They do provide it. But obviously, it's different when you just had to go to the well. Now you have a bus or truck that comes once a week to get you a few gallons of water. So that does happen in some parts of the country, and it's bad. I don't know if the solution is to rewrite the whole water right system.
Very interesting question. Yeah,
because it could make it worse. If companies now don't have to pay for the water, then why be efficient at all? You just have to be upstream, right? Whoever it's upstream can use the water. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, clearly, water rights it's not just a Chilean issue that is becoming and will be more and more an issue globally as climate change. By the way, I don't want to deflect you too much from the politics of the thing, but to what extent are climate issues really having an impact in Chile? I mean, are you finding physical changes in the environment and
yes, well, I guess
access to water and so on?
Yeah, so I think like everywhere in the world, we've seen droughts, extreme weather, desertification. So we see the impacts. From the finance side, which is where I can comment more, is that we've seen a growing interest both from investors and from companies to issue green bonds or ESG bonds or ESG financing in order to, on one hand, have access to additional funding, but on the other, show or show to the public that companies are making efforts to become greener, more socially responsible, and have better corporate governance. So there is an interest, both from the, I would say, company side or enterprises, where they want to be greener or more ESG responsible, and investors as well.
Well,
obviously, this is also very important for the Constitution.
Yeah, I would imagine, although details elude me. But you would say that public opinion now is people are becoming conscious and believers in climate change, right? Or would you still say that there's a significant part of public opinion that denies it and wants
to? No, I don't think we have many denials here in Chile. At one point, the opposing candidate, the far right, had some wording on his proposals that pointed out to deny climate change and had weird wording like, if at some point the temperature is rising because the effect of man, so on and so forth. There was some weird wording also in terms of coal, production of electricity by coal plants. he was not definitely against them. That changed as time moved forward. Because also, and maybe going back to the politics side of this, he and his party didn't think he would make it so far. So from the point of view of politics, I mean, he was pretty far to the right, and he defended that position because there was no expectation of being the primary candidate.
Now,
Yeah.
sorry, you're talking about whom?
Oh, I'm talking about the opposite candidate from the far right.
Yeah. What's his name?
Cast, Jose Miguel Cast, Jose Antonio Cast, Jose Antonio Cast.
And he was defeated. No, okay.
He was defeated. Yes, he was defeated.
Okay. Well, in other countries, I mean, all I know about South America's climate thing is about Bolsonaro,
Yeah.
and I hope he's unique. But to what extent are there other governments or other politicians that take the same united point of view?
I would say he's alone in that fight. And to point out more or less the difference, Cast was very similar to Bolsonaro, and what some people believe is that Boric is pretty much very, very close to Maduro. So these are the opposites that we had on our elections.
Okay, so you think that he is closer to Maduro? Okay.
Boric, yes, very close.
Really? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. That's interesting. I because I've got, I just acquire packages of ideologies and without undoing them, and my visceral reaction to Maduro is not all that warm.
Well, the meme on the elections is that from the right, obviously, that Chile is now going to be Chilezuela.
Well, do you really? I mean, is there evidence for that? Or are you just having a bad fantasy?
So there's this saying, right? It's little by little and then all at once. I think that if there's enough changes and if the Constitution goes the wrong way, in my view, we could end up pretty much like Venezuela. Because if we're thinking about nationalization of natural resources, right, on changes on water rights, on the president-elect already stated that he wanted to end the private healthcare system, and that was going to be public, and probably the private healthcare system will transform into some of complementary additional health insurance. There's issues on what he's going to do regarding private education. We have non-for-profit education, but we still have private non-for-profit education. That might not be the case in the future. There's concerns on how this is going to translate into investment, foreign investment in Chile. If there is a capital flight going out of the country, there's probably going to be effect on the exchange rate. That's not good. We import lots of things. So we have an independent central bank, and so far it hasn't been up for discussion whether the central bank should be controlled by the government. But if things go south, well, that might be up for discussion too. So if the government now controls the constitution and the central bank, then things can get out of control pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. But anyway, for me, I mean, just by nationalizing mineral rights and water rights, well, we're pretty far gone from what we were now. Then you only have public insurance, and there's also the reform of the pension systems that we haven't discussed that I think are very relevant too. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you want to get into that now.
Well, but okay, go ahead and mention that. I'm just
okay.
Look, but I guess a more general question for me is, I would agree with them not being anywhere near Chile, but just that the world in general has increased inequality seriously, and I certainly know in many countries, we're finding a greater disparity of wealth, a shocking level of inequality. So I guess the question is, if you were president yourself, given the values that you've enunciated, what kinds of measures would you take that would help alleviate this growing inequality or reverse it?
I wouldn't be president. I would never be president. So I think that my biggest reform would be education. And I guess the problem with education is that the effect is very long term. So it's not favored by politicians, because whatever changes they make, it's not going to be seen for another 10, 20 years. But having high quality education, not only in the primary, but on preschool, to me would be a huge advantage. I would also probably reduce the size of the public sector, and without giving complete liberty to the private sector. I would increase regulation, of course, but reduce public sector. We see inefficiencies. We have inefficiencies in public companies. I don't want to get into a political discussion on the power of public teachers, and the doctors from public hospitals, but it's a very powerful group that has an above average wage, and that it creates a disparity with their private peers. So my general view would be less public sector, more regulation, but more free market.
But that I think almost everybody would agree that the disadvantage of free markets is that it tends to increase inequality. So if you will concede that much, and maybe you won't, how would you, within the perspective of the neoliberal position, which maybe is an unfair characterization of your views, but from that perspective, what possible changes are being promoted as a measure to reduce what I would still insist is really a shocking level of inequality?
So I think that there is a lot to be done in terms of subsidies, but focalized subsidies, for instance, public housing. Right? We have a serious public housing problem, which has been, I would say, accelerated by immigration. We have roughly 10% of immigrants population that came from less than 1% 10 years ago. Most coming from Venezuela, Colombia, and Haiti. We have probably the largest population of Venezuelans in Latin America, because they all came here. Now they're leaving because they're very concerned, but some of them are leaving. So we have housing issues, and with housing issues comes ghetto problems, right? They tend to be focalized, and that leads to a whole sort of things. Again, not my field, but it comes to education, poverty levels within the community, less opportunities of employment. I don't know, more underage kids on the streets, drug problems, less schooling, and that leads to a whole other set of things. So housing, education, key areas of development that could be solved, or could be, I would say, improved by subsidies and provided by private companies, instead of leaving all in the hands of just the government to provide the actual solution. Like build houses, build more schools, build more hospitals.
Hmm. Okay. I'm not sure I'm satisfied, but but fortunately for you, I don't have a vote. Okay, go ahead. And you wanted to talk about pension reform,
Yes.
other things. Yeah.
Yes. So we have a private funded system, which is complemented by a contribution, socially contribution, and a minimum provided by the government. That has not worked well. The amounts that people are receiving as pensions are low compared to the wages that they received while they were working. Now, from a mathematical point of view, right, the reason for that is that there are many gaps in pension contribution, which come from unemployment and which come from the fact that independent individuals don't have a mandatory contribution. So you only contribute to your pension if you are on a contract. If you are independent and you're not on a permanent contract, then you don't contribute. So all the people that are just independent, like, I don't know, doctors, lawyers, whatever, don't have a contract, or the people that are just freelancing or that don't have a contract, informally employed, they don't have pension contributions. Therefore, the amount that they have in their pool of assets is low. Therefore, their pensions are low. So there are many ways to solve that. One is to increase contributions, right? Another one could be by having the government complement that contribution over time, still under private accounts, right? Where what you get, it comes from what you put in. In terms of revenues or profitability, those funds have been probably one of the most profitable investment assets over the past 30 years. So they have not done bad. They have done pretty well. Now, the problem is that the companies that manage these funds are private, and those have profits. And what the public is saying is that if those companies did not make profits, we would have better pensions. And that is mathematically not the case, right? So if none of those companies had any revenue and all that revenue had gone into pensions, pensions would vary less than 5%. But the public opinion is that they're making too much money because they make money. If you make money, or if you're profitable or unprofitable, they still make money. So this is this feeling of injustice that I talked in the beginning. So one of the proposals was to create a public management company, right? So it would be government owned, would not have any profits, and it would manage your personal funds if you chose to do so. If you chose to stick with the private and have the private company have some profits, that would be on to you. But the far left and President-elect said, no, we don't like that. We don't want this system. So we want to have a purely distribution system where we have intergenerational subsidies, where with today's taxes, we pay pensions. In the future, when you're going to go into a pension, you will get your pension from the taxes of people from the future. We've seen that system is not sustainable, right? We've seen it mostly everywhere.
In other countries, presumably.
In other countries.
I don't know. I have no awareness of this. What other countries have tried it and failed?
Almost, I would say 80% of countries have public systems that are based on this, where you today's taxes pay for today's pensions. And the problem with that is that if your population grows older with time, which is what happens, and growth rates of the populations go down, then as time goes by, there's fewer people working and there's more people on pensions. And it's very hard to maintain that level unless you increase taxes, because you have to pay pensions to more people and you have fewer people working. So most countries are going the opposite way. Most countries are going into private contribution systems, where at least in a complementary way, you will have a publicly funded basic pension, and you would have your own private pension that sits on top of it. Then the discussion comes, what is the minimum pension that you should get from the government, and how much taxes are we going to charge on whatever you save for your own pension? Now the problem is in countries where there is a lot of private pensions, the government has seen those funds as a way to fund themselves. So we saw it in Argentina, where at one point the government mandated the fund managers to purchase government bonds so the government would be funded. So they started using pension funds, private pension funds, as a way to fund government. And then they just nationalize funds and say, well, we'll figure it out later, give us your money. We'll figure out how to distribute this to people in a way that's more fair to everyone. Now, the discussion also is, well, what is a fair pension? Should you have worked to receive a pension? Some people say yes, some people say no. It's different to be the wife of a millionaire and never worked than to be a housewife that couldn't work because had to take care of the kids. Should we give the same pension to everyone? Now the current offer from the current government is to have a public universal pension for everyone that is going to be linked, or that would be linked to the minimum wage. So it's going to be a little bit below the minimum wage. And that would be available for everyone, as long as we keep in parallel the private system that would sit on top of this public pension. But that is probably not going to pass.
But I do have one orientation that's a little different from the economic. And that is, my conviction is that at least I don't want to speak about the rest of the world, but I've been following the US quite a bit. I'm a US and Canadian citizen, so I follow the Trump saga. And I am pretty convinced that the support for Trump did not come from really economic considerations. That although most people say it's because of the people from the Rust Belt were disappointed about the fact that their jobs have been sent overseas and so on. And I don't think it really was economic. I think my analysis of the exit polls indicates it really had nothing to do with economics. And at least it had something to do with a sense of elitism or resentment of elites, of very high level income people in the academic and professional IT fields and so on. Those guys are, scientists and so on. There's a lot of resentment against high professionals, but other than that, it's not about the economy. But it's really about a sense of resentment of having lost social status, that we have these white nationalist folks who are, really act like little young Nazis, and really resent immigrants and all kinds of people who are getting privileges compared to their own traditional status within the society. They resent the rights given to women, to immigrants, to religious communities, Muslims, to people from Latin America coming in and so on. And it's really this sense of loss of priority as a white nationalist position. But when I think about other countries, I can't translate that analysis into other countries, maybe because I don't know enough. But is there any sense in which a person could argue that that is a comparable a situation in Chile or in, well, anywhere else in Latin America?
I wouldn't say so.
No.
At least the opposing candidate, Cast, he was very much compared to Trump in the early days of his campaign, because his followers were from a niche that could probably be comparable to that. But as the campaign moved forward and he started gathering more and more votes from the right, he was extreme right. I think that is not representative of both the end results of the campaign, where 47%, I think, voted for this opposing candidate Cast. I don't think that 47% are comparable to the 50-something% that Trump got in the US. I don't have that feeling, and I think that most of the people that did vote for Cast voted for economic reasons, or for fear of the economic consequences of Gabriel Boric. And to Gabriel Boric's point, I don't think that people that voted for him voted for economic reasons. I think that they voted for sociological reasons, in terms of what is the type of society that they wanted to live in, more than what would be the economic outcome of that vote. Now, probably, I don't know, how are we on time?
Well, we're through.
Maybe as
We're
a final
over
note,
time. I have to quit.
maybe as one of the final notes, I do believe that in terms of social peace and having Boric being the president-elect probably was the better option, because all the almost 1 million people that went on the streets to celebrate his victory, that would be 1 million people rioting if it was the opposite and Cast was elected. So even though I would feel more comfortable with the economic reforms that the opposing president, I didn't even vote for him, but I would feel more comfortable with his reforms, economic reforms. I think that the social environment in Chile is going to be much better with Gabriel Boric, especially, well, obviously he won, and he has a lot of support. So if it was the opposite, that support would have been a very aggressive opposition, both in terms of politics, but mostly on the streets. And the problem that we had in Chile were on the streets. I mean, we had very severe riots, and I don't want my country to go through that process again. So I think if we have to sacrifice economic growth for having safety, internal safety, and no riots, no looting, and no fires, I would take that in the short term. In the long run, we might have riots anyway, because there might be unemployment, and people might feel that the promises the government made are not being fulfilled. But that's going to be in 5 years, and maybe we'll have a different government that can solve them.
Well, this has been wonderful. This has been very, very helpful. And I'm going to get back to you for another session on blockchain, if you're willing. Okay?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Meta. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, bye. Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, and sometimes more. This is episode 392. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. And when you get to the website, please look around, because we have conversations going on all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. And after you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your thoughts about the show with the other viewers.